welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and I am joined by the XO, the Christoph. Hey, buddy.
Hey. Oh, hey Dale. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm got my voice back, so that's great.
That's good. Did you loan it out to somebody or what's going on?
Now it got stolen by disease.
Disease. Well, I'm glad you got it back.
The plague cannot beat me.
That's right. We're tougher than that. You and me.
Yes. So, history?
Yes. Let's make it.
We're talking about it.
Well, we're telling it, but we're also making it at the same time. Like what we're living through now will be history at one point, so.
Yeah, that's true. There have been a few history events in our time. Well,
Indeed. Imagine one day there could be something equivalent to a podcast talking about us, talking about the American Revolution.
oh, that's meta.
Isn't that wild? I don't think we're going to garner that significant. I mean, with the listeners' help, yes, we can. Please tell a friend. Get more people listening. And then maybe one day in the future podcasts will talk about this podcast and make that dream come true, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes. So where we left off last, we were talking about the Saratoga Theater. We had just finished talking about the St. Leger's expedition. You're nodding, but I don't believe your nod.
I'm agreeing that words made a coherent sentence, but I'm processing, what was it? Because it has been a while since that expedition was talked about. And so
You're
trying,
giving the listeners a peek behind the curtain. Come on now.
I'm sorry. Remove this in post. Now you're shaking your head.
That's because it's not everybody's going to listen to this.
That's okay. That's okay. I want to be transparent with the listener. I try to stay on top of it. Sometimes I miss. I'm human.
So as a reminder, Benedict Arnold, Stillwater.
Oh, yeah. All you had to do was say Benedict Arnold, and I'm back in.
Okay. So we're going to jump right back in from where we left off. So you ready to get underway now that you remember where we were?
Yes, sir. Yes. Indeed.
All right, let's cast off. So Burgoyne's army, they advanced to Fort Edward. And just like their approach to Ticonderoga, they were preceded by a wave of Native Americans, which chased away a small contingent of troops that Schuyler left there. Now, the Native Americans, they started getting impatient with how slowly everything was moving. So they began to do raids on frontier families and settlements. Just randomly. So this had an effect, as you can well imagine. Do you know what kind of effect this had?
A negative one. If I was a frontier family and I had to put up with that baloney, I'd be pretty upset, and then I would be escalating that as much as possible. And then neighbors that heard about me being raided I would imagine, number one, first be afraid, and then two, really upset. Upset enough to take action. I would imagine.
You are imagining very, very well. Because,
Ah.
yes, instead of, scaring everybody away, the settlers and the people there, their support to the American cause skyrocketed.
Yep. Collective punishment doesn't work. Future military folks.
Yeah. There was one event that really, really skyrocketed support. That was the death of a young loyalist settler named Jane McCrae. She was described as attractive and young and killed by Native American hands. And this was very widely publicized. And, you kill a young woman, young, attractive woman.
Oh, yeah. I've seen Nancy Grace. I know how this goes down.
And because Bjorgon decided not to punish the people responsible, and that he did not seem to be able to keep his native allies under control, this did not sit well.
I can imagine not. Oof.
Let's see. So on August 3rd, messengers from General Howie finally made their way through the American lines to Burgon's camp at Fort Edward. Now, you got to understand that this was actually a miracle because numerous attempts by the British generals to communicate with, is their people were stymied when the Americans capture and then hung their messengers.
Well, isn't there an expression, something to the effect of "Don't kill the messenger"? Yet, that's exactly what we did.
Yes, you are absolutely correct. You're not supposed to kill the messenger, but these guys definitely did.
I don't mean to laugh. That sounds terrible. Um, Go on.
Now, the messages that actually did come through did not have good news. On July 17th, Howie wrote that he was prepared to depart by sea with his army to capture Philadelphia, and that General Clinton, who was responsible for New York City's defense, could and would act as occurrences may direct. Now, once Bjorgon got this news, he refused to tell the rest of his staff what was in the messages.
That's curious. Why would he not tell them?
He was probably terrified of how his staff would react.
I guess that's true. Just in order to. He's managing a lot of things at once, and this news would probably put things into disarray. I could see that.
Hmm. So Biron realizes he has a very serious supply problem. You know, because of the wilderness and because of attacks on the supply line and everything like that, and just the length that they had to have one.
Oh, that's true.
He decided to act on a suggestion that a guy named Baron Rye Diesel had made to him back in July. Rye Diesel had forces stationed at Charleston, had observed that the area was actually rich in draft animal and horses.
Hmm.
So, he's like, we can just grab them.
He's a filthy rustler, huh?
Yeah. So Yergon's like, you know what? Now this is a great idea. Look at my supply lines. I need these things.
Right.
Everybody's pissed off at me anyway, so why not?
Yeah, why? Yeah. Just lean into it.
So he sends a guy named Colonel Frederick Baum and his regiment towards western Massachusetts and New Hampshire on August 9th, along with some dragoons. Here's the thing, most of them never return. And when they sent reinforcements after them to figure out what's going on, they came back ravaged
Oh.
because of a battle called the Battle of Bennington. So this took about 1,000 men and a lot of supplies away from him.
That's right.
What he did not know was that the St. Clair's calls for militia support following their withdrawal from Ticonderoga had actually been answered.
Oh,
And a guy named General John Stark had placed 2,000 men at Bennington.
that's a significant number for sure.
Yeah. Stark's force enveloped Baum and his men, killing him and capturing most of his men.
Dang.
So this battle and of course the death of pretty young Jane McCrae had another important effect other than just, rallying cries. You see, Burgoyne blamed his Native American and Canadian allies for McCrae's death, and even after the Native Americans had lost 80 of their own at Burnington, Burgoyne did not show them any gratitude at all.
Ah, that's awful. It's like, hey, why don't you lead the effort on the attack and just, do your thing, and then they do their thing. It's like, oh, no, no, that was terrible. I should have controlled you more. It's like, yeah, we lost a bunch of guys doing that. It's like, it's not my problem. What a
S-
jerk.
Yeah. So because of this, most of the Native Americans left the British camp.
That's wise.
This left Burgoyne with fewer than 100 Native American scouts. And he was also left with no protection in the woods against American Rangers.
Oh.
He would, of course, blame them for deserting him, but specifically LaCorne countered that Burgoyne never respected the Native Americans.
Yeah. His actions seem to reflect that.
And Lord Germain in the British Parliament did not side with him. He sided with the Native Americans.
Oh.
I know. That's weird. This was, one of the American tactics, which was to delay him, and this worked very well, as you've now heard. So the result in the Continental Congress for all of this was actually a different matter. General Horatio Gates, he was in Philadelphia when Congress discussed their shock when they learned that Ticonderoga fell. And of course, Gates was more than willing to help assign blame to different generals.
So glad we have Gates around. Otherwise, how would we know who to blame?
Exactly. There were people in Congress that had been very impatient with General George Washington. They wanted a large, direct confrontation that would hopefully eliminate the occupation forces. But Washington was like, we would probably lose the war if we did that. John Adams, who was the head of the War Committee, he actually rained down praise onto Gates and said, quote, "We shall never hold a post until we shoot a general."
What does that mean?
I think what he means by this is we need to get rid of the, in our opinion, crappy generals, or we'll never get anywhere.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
He just said it more violently.
Indeed, yes, I agree with that as well.
Congress sends Gates to take command of the Northern Department on August 10th. And this was actually over the objections of the New York delegation.
Hmm.
They also ordered states from Pennsylvania to Massachusetts to call out their militias. So on August 19th, Gates arrives in Albany to take charge. He was described as cold and arrogant, and he made a point to exclude Schuyler from his first war council. Schuyler was like, well, fine, be that way, and left Fort Philadelphia soon after that. And this deprived Gates of all of Schuyler's knowledge of the area.
That seems like a bad decision. Never let hubris get in the way of accomplishing the objective, especially when you're outgunned and outmanned.
Well, remember that during this time, honor was everything.
That's true.
You besmirch my honor, I leave, and
Be
you
gone
don't
with
get to,
you. Yes.
you don't get my benefits.
Yeah, that's true. No, Gates should have definitely. Well, I don't know. It probably was his character, and it's hard for me to say, hey, go against your character, but please choose differently and use the resources around you to make better decisions. Anyway, we'll see how it turns out. Continue, Dale.
Well, remember, Gates has no compunction over pointing the finger at other people to take the blame. So why wouldn't he be like that to his quote unquote subordinates?
Yeah, it's true. I had a boss like that once. It was the reason I left that company.
Yeah. So throughout the month of August and into September, militia companies arrived at the Continental Army camps on the Hudson. And they were augmented by troops Washington ordered north from the Hudson Highlands as part of General Arnold's operation to relieve Stanwix. And they got there at the end of August. And this included a guy named Daniel Morgan and his rifle corps. These were sharpshooters.
Nice.
So, news of the American successes at Bennington and Fort Stanwix, combined with the outrage over the death of pretty young Jane McCrae, this all rallied support. So, this swelled Gates's army to over 6,000.
Wow. Those are massive numbers in that day.
This does not include Stark's small army at Bennington.
Oh.
And of course, there were also several hundred troops with General Benjamin Lincoln, who was the guys assigned to attack the supply and communication trains.
The messenger killers, maybe?
Yes, probably. You have a message. You are a spy.
That's right.
Hang 'em. At least I think that would be their justification, but who knows?
Yeah, I guess being a traitor was punishable by death for quite some time.
And each side considered the other side traitors, so.
Yeah, so it kind of rationalized the whole thing.
So that brings us to the Battle of Saratoga. This was a month-long series of maneuvers punctuated by 2 battles. Not the single event that people often think it is. So at the beginning of September in 1777, Burgoyne's army was now just over 7,000. And they were and they were located on the east bank of the Hudson.
Okay.
He had been told of St. Leger's failure at Stanwix on August 28th, and even earlier that Howe would not be giving him substantial support from New York. So now he needs to reach a defensible winter quarter. So this would either require him to go back to Ticonderoga or advance to Albany. He decided on the latter.
Okay.
So because of this decision, he made 2 further critical decisions. He decided to deliberately cut communications to the north. That way, he would not need to maintain a chain of heavily fortified outposts between his position and Ticonderoga. And he also decided to cross the Hudson River, which he was in a relatively strong position to do. So he ordered Rye Diesel, who his forces were in the rear, to abandon outposts from Skanesboro south. And he ordered the army to cross the river just north of Saratoga, which they did do between September 13th and 15th. Now, he did decide to move cautiously because, he did not have his Native American scouts anymore. So he didn't have reliable scouting. So Burgoyne advances to the south. And on September 18th, the vanguard of his army had reached a position just north of Saratoga, which is about 4 miles from the American defensive line. And so skirmishing now occurs between the head of each of the armies. So when Gates, when he took over Schuyler's army, much of it was located near the mouth of the Mohawk River, which was south of Stillwater. And on September 8th, he ordered the army, which numbered about 10,000, to go to Stillwater and his idea was to set up defenses there. There was a Polish engineer named Thaddeus Kasuko, and he looked around the area and he was like, no, this is a crap place to put defensive works up. So he scouted out and found a more suitable location about 3 miles further north, which was about 10 miles south of Saratoga. So this is where they laid out their defensive line, stretching from the river to the bluffs called Bemis Heights. So the right side of the defenses were given to General Lincoln because he had to start leading troops for a diversion against Ticonderoga. Gates ended up assuming command of that line himself.
All right.
Gates then puts General Arnold in command of the army's left, which was the western defenses on the heights themselves. So, Arnold and Gates, they had a good relationship up until about now.
Oh, really? Do tell.
Well, Arnold decided to choose his command staff and populated it with friends of Schuyler. And Gates hates Schuyler.
Yes. So de facto, he hates all the people that Arnold has now surrounded himself with.
Yes. And so this brings out internal power squabbles. Squabbles.
Squibble dibbles? Yeah.
Yes.
Very familiar.
So both Arnold and Burgoyne, they recognize the importance of the American left flank. Burgoyne recognized that the position could be flanked, and so he divides his forces, sending a large detachment to the west. Arnold, also recognizing that a British attack on the left was very likely, asked Gates for permission to move his forces out to a place called Freeman's Farm to anticipate this flanking maneuver. Gates said no.
What? I mean, yeah, he's a tool, so I get it. But it seems like, again, hey, that's a good idea. Why don't you do that so we can save the lives of many Americans?
Yeah.
I'm shrugging, listener.
He wanted to wait behind his defenses for a expected frontal attack. He did allow Arnold to send the sharpshooter Daniel Morgan and his riflemen and some light infantry out for a reconnaissance in a bit of force, a lot of guys instead of just a little reconnaissance force, a big one.
Okay.
So this was the Battle of Freeman's Farm. This is where they made contact with Burgoyne's flank. So in this battle, the British gained control of Freeman's Farm, but at the cost of about 600 casualties.
Yikes, that is huge.
This was 10% of their forces.
Yeah, in one battle.
So after this battle, there is now a full-blown feud between Gates and Arnold. Gates did not mention Arnold in the official account of the battle he sent to Congress. And he also transferred Morgan's company, which had been independent technically, but did operate under Arnold's command, to himself.
Oh my gosh, Gates, what are you doing?
Yeah. So there was a huge, huge, very loud argument in Gates's quarters between Arnold and him. And Gates said that General Lincoln would be replaced. So Arnold leaves there and he writes a letter to Gates. It's like, well, good luck arguing with a letter.
Right.
And in the letter, he outlined his grievances and requested a transfer to Washington's command. Gates gave Arnold a week's pass. And he continued to stew on, petty things about Arnold. Now, there is a reason that is commonly accepted why Arnold chose to remain. And that is because there was a petition signed by all of the line officers, except for Gates and Lincoln, wanting him to stay.
Wow. A man of the people.
Now, there is actually no evidence of this actually happening, but it'd be cool.
Well, yeah, and it's one of the more plausible explanations given the crap that he just went through and the argument and the demotion of sorts. Not demotion, but like the removal of command and the replacement. Just like you said earlier in the episode, honor is everything, and he's being dishonored left and right. So why does he stay? And I think that's a plausible reason.
Mm-hmm. So Burgoyne, he considered, attacking again the next day, but decided against it when he was told by a guy named Fraser that, all of your guys are exhausted from the day before. You might not want to send them in. So instead, he had his guys dig in and he waited for news from the South, which was to get him some help.
Okay.
He received a letter from General Clinton in New York on September 21st, which suggested that a movement of the Hudson would draw off some of Gates' army. Now, he was aware of persistent desertions that were reducing the size of his army because his army was running short of food and other critical supplies. What he didn't know was that the American army was growing daily in size.
Thanks to Jane McCrae.
And he also didn't know that Gates knew exactly how dire his situation was. See, they hung the messengers, but their own spies were good.
That's right. They knew the terrain. They knew how to get around. Makes sense.
So what neither side knew at Saratoga until, after the battle was that General Lincoln and General John Brown had staged an attack against the British position at Fort Ticonderoga. Lincoln had collected about 2,000 men at Bennington by early September. And after marching north of Paulet, they received word that the guard at Ticonderoga might be able to be surprised. So Lincoln sends 3 detachments of 500 men each to, quote, annoy, divide, and distract the enemy. One of these detachments went to Skenesborough, which when they got there, they were like, oh, the British abandoned here. The second detachment went to capture Mount Independence on the east side of Lake Champlain. And the third, which was led by John Brown, made the approach to Ticonderoga. So on the morning of September 18th, Colonel Brown succeeded in surprising the British defenders at the south end of the Portage Trail, which connected Lake George to Lake Champlain. They rapidly moved up the trail, and his men continued to surprise the British, and they captured artillery pieces until they reached the height of land just before the fort itself. This is where they occupied the, quote, old French lines. It was called this because it was there that a French defense held against a much larger British army in 1758. So on the way there, he did release 100 prisoners. This allowed him to increase the size of his forces because now he doesn't have to have men watching the prisoners.
Right.
And then captures nearly 300.
Yikes.
So he demands that the fort surrenders, and this demand was refused. So over the next 4 days, Brown's men and the fort exchange cannonade fire. And this fire really didn't have any real effect to anybody.
Okay, I was curious because cannons take a while to load, I assume. And when you shoot a cannonball, I guess it would devastate whatever's directly in front of it, but I don't know. It does. 4 days of that just seems like pomp and circumstance more than anything.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it was. Remember, this was a distraction.
Oh, yes. So it's going exactly according to plan.
He didn't have sufficient manpower to actually assault the fort.
Right.
So after this 4 days, he then withdraws to Lake George and makes a unsuccessful attempt to capture a store depot on the island in the lake. So General Gates writes to Lincoln when the Battle of Freeman's Farm happens, and he orders his forces back to Saratoga. He said, quote, not one moment should be lost. So his troops arrived there between September 22nd through September 29th to Berman Heights. So that brings us to General Sir Henry Clinton, who is in charge of New York's defenses. He had instructions to assist Burgoyne if opportunities arise. So he writes to Burgoyne on September 12th that he would, quote, make a push at Fort Montgomery in about 10 days, if you think 2,000 men can assist you effectively. And when he receives the letter, he sends an immediate reply. He appeals to Clinton for instruction on whether he should attempt to advance or retreat based on the likelihood of Clinton's arrival at Albany for support. He indicated that if he did not receive a response by October 12th, he would be forced to retreat. So on October 3rd, Clinton sails up the Hudson River with 3,000 men. And on October 6th, one day after receiving Burgoyne's appeal, captured the Highland forts named Clinton and Montgomery.
Way to go, guys.
Now, Burgoyne never received word that this victory happened because all 3 messengers had been captured. So Clinton follows up this victory by dismantling the chain across the Hudson. The one that kept boats from going up and down.
Right, exactly.
And he sends a raiding force up the river that reached as far north as Livingston Manor on October 16th before turning around and heading back. Gates received word of all this after the Battle of Bemis Heights. So, very long time to get word of what's happening.
Yes.
So, speaking of Bemis Heights, so Lincoln has 2,000 men, and that's when militia units start pouring into the American camp.
Oh,
This swells the American army to over 15,000.
wow.
Had put his army on short rations on October 3rd, meaning they're not getting very much food.
Oh, okay. So they're trying to stretch out the rations. Okay.
Yep. And he calls a council the next day. The decision of this meeting was to launch a reconnaissance in force of about 1,700 men towards the left flank of the American line. Burgoyne and Fraser leads this detachment early the afternoon of October 7th, and of course their movement is spotted. Gates wanted to order only sharpshooter Daniel Morgan's men out to oppose them, but Arnold was like, no, that is not enough. You got to send out a larger force. Gates, he's like, your tone is crap. Quote, you have no business here.
Golly, Gates.
But, Lincoln also gives him pretty much the same advice. So Gates
Oh, I
was
see.
like, all right. So, in addition to sending Morgan out around the British right, he also sends Edoc Poor's brigade against Burgoyne's left.
Oh.
So, when Poor's men make contact, that is when the Battle of Bemis Heights starts. The initial attack by the Americans was very, very effective, and Burgoyne attempted a retreat. But his aide was shot before the order could be transmitted, I guess you
Communicated,
could
yeah.
say. Yeah. So in the fighting, the very intense fighting as it's described, the flanks were exposed. Even though the center held fast. That is when General Fraser is mortally wounded. And credit for this was given to Timothy Murphy, which is one of Morgan's men, but this appears to be a fabrication
I see.
coming out of the 19th century.
Oh. Yeah, my
Yeah.
grandfather shot General Fraser.
Yeah, exactly. So after Fraser goes down, and when additional American troops arrive, Burgoyne orders what's pretty much left of his forces to retreat. So General Arnold, he is very frustrated. He can hear the fighting and he's not there. He's not happy.
That would be very frustrating.
So he just gets on a horse and rides off and joins the fray.
Oh, nice.
Now, some people have claimed that Arnold was in a drunken fury and he took the battle to the British position. The right side of the British line consisted of two earthen redoubts. This was a redoubt is a fort or fort system that consisted of an enclosed defensive encampment outside of a larger fort. So, it's like the fort's here. Here's a baby fort with guns.
Right?
These had been erected on Freeman's farm and were manned by Bruin-Wickers under a guy named Heinrich Breyman. So Arnold's first attempt to attack the redoubt was not successful. He then, in his quote unquote drunken fury, rides boldly through the gap between two redoubts,
Oh.
which was guarded by a small company of Canadian irregulars. Leonard's men follows him, and they make a assault on the open rear of one of Berryman's redoubt.
Holy moly.
Yes.
They probably were not expecting that. And I guess it would take kind of a drunken fury to ride a horse into a redoubt.
Well, alcohol makes you braver, I guess.
I guess. For some, yes.
This is when Arnold's horse is shot out from under him, and it pins him and breaks his leg.
Oh.
Yeah. But Brayman is killed in this fierce battle, and the position is taken.
Wow. Broken
hmm
leg and all.
Night now falls, and night comes down. Battle's over. So this was a bloodbath for the British. The lobster backs had nearly 900 dead, wounded, or captured.
And that's on the heels of losing 600 just a few days before, right?
Yeah.
Yikes.
The Americans, 150.
Yeah, that's given the situation, that's not too bad at all.
Yeah. So Simon Fraser, he dies of his wounds the next day, but they didn't bury him until about sunset for whatever reason. Burgon then orders his army, whose entrenchments are being harassed pretty much constantly, to retreat.
Yeah, after those kind of losses, that seems like the right choice.
Yeah. It takes his army nearly 2 days to reach Saratoga. Remember, this is about 10 miles, so this should be an easy 1-day march.
Yeah, for sure. But I
But
guess tired, bedraggled, hurt.
also heavy rain
Oh,
and, American probing attacks.
mm.
This, will slow an army down quite significantly.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, there's also logistical problems.
I almost feel bad for the British. Almost, but not quite.
Yeah. You see, they weren't getting enough food.
Ooh.
Gates does order detachments to take positions on the east side of the Hudson so they could oppose any attempted crossings. And by the morning of October 13th, Burgon's army was completely surrounded.
Oh.
So his war council, they take a vote. We need to start negotiating. Please.
That is how conflicts end, usually.
So terms are agreed on October 16th. That, Burgon insisted on calling a convention rather than what it was. On October 17th, following a ceremony in which Burgon gave his sword to Gates, Gates, in his fashion, returned it to
Oh,
gentlemen.
yeah.
Burgon's army, which was about 6,000 strong, marched out to surrender with their arms, while the American musicians played Yankee Doodle.
Nice. I'm glad the musicians were on board.
Musicians were key in the armies in these days.
I guess not just for morale, but for sending signals, I assume.
Trumpets for signals,
Yeah.
flags were used for signals. Shooting you in the face was a signal, I guess.
Yep, that is, yeah, get the message. Am I right? But yeah,
All right.
I was going to say, I'm just trying to picture modern military units with modern music or musicians. So I don't know if you'd have a heavy metal band or maybe EDM because there's less equipment. I don't know.
There is a official band in each military service, and they still play the classics.
Nice. I'm glad to hear that.
At least back when I was in. I don't know. It could be changed now. It could be Leonard Skinner now, for all I know.
Oh my gosh. Um, I doubt it, but who knows? The military of the future may have a only if they have a very I bet if they played a few licks of Sweet Home Alabama, everybody was like, "Yeah," and then get wound up and then go do their thing.
That was only played when we were drinking.
I see. Yeah, you gotta divide duty and shore leave.
So let's get into the aftermath, shall we?
All right, yes.
So the British withdrew from Ticonderoga and Crown Point in November, and Lake Champlain was free of British troops by early December.
Nice.
Americans, on the other hand, had work to do. They got alerted to General Clinton's raids on the Hudson, and most of the army marched south towards Albany on October 18th, while other detachments accompanied the Convention Army east. Burgoyne and Rye Diesel became guests of General Schuyler, who had come north to witness the surrender. Burgoyne was allowed to return to England on parole in May of 1778, where he spent the next 2 years defending himself in Parliament and the press.
Wow.
He was eventually exchanged for more than 1,000 American prisoners.
Whoa. That's a high value target.
It's a general.
Oh, yeah.
So if you don't know what they meant by release on parole is you can go home, but you're still a prisoner.
Oh, okay. I didn't know what that meant.
That's why I'm explaining it to you.
Well, then, thank you. I feel edified.
You're welcome. You are edificated. So, in response to the surrender, Congress declared December 18th, 1777 as a national day, quote, for solemn thanksgiving and praise in recognition of the military success at Saratoga.
Sorry, what was that date again?
December 18th, 1777.
Man, I missed the celebration this past several years, actually. I should have really be more patriotic.
This was the nation's first official observance of a holiday with the name Thanksgiving.
Wow, no kidding.
So, under the terms of the convention, Buron's army was to march to Boston, where British ships would transport it back to England, on condition that its members not participate in the conflict until they were formally exchanged. So, they were put on parole as well. Congress also demanded that Burgoyne provided a list of troops in the army so that the terms of the agreement concerning future combat could be enforced. When he refused, Congress decided not to honor the terms of the convention, and the army was held in captivity.
This is an interesting era. I mean, the whole parole bit takes a lot of trust. It's like, as a gentleman, you have to promise that you're still our prisoner, even though you're in your homeland, and there is no possible way we could extract you. And he's like, okay. And that just doesn't seem like it would work nowadays.
Probably not nowadays, no, because we're not gentlemen anymore.
No. I mean, you and me, sure, yes. But those guys, no.
Those guys.
Yeah, you know who I mean.
Actually, it was very common in naval battles if the ship is captured for it to be ordered to sail to a foreign port where they would remain until officially traded.
Really?
Yeah. So back to these POWs. They were kept in sparse camps throughout New England for quite a while. And individual officers were exchanged here and there, but much of the army was eventually marched south to Virginia, where they were kept there for several years.
Wow.
Throughout their captivity, a large number of men, estimated at more than 1,300 just in the first year, escaped and effectively deserted the British Army, settling in the United States.
Yeah, I can see that.
So on December 4th, 1777, word reached Benjamin Franklin at Versailles because remember, he was in France. He received word that Philadelphia had fallen and that Bourguignon had surrendered. 2 days later, King Louis the 16th, he agreed to negotiations for an alliance.
Nice.
Ooh. And the treaty was signed on February 6, 1778. And this is when France declared war on Britain a month, and hostilities began with them with a naval battle off Ushant in June. Spain didn't enter into the war until 1779, when it entered as an ally of France, which was because of a secret treaty of Arenois.
I was not aware of their involvement. Like, you hear a lot about France and how they helped, but Spain not as much.
Mm-hmm. The diplomatic moves following the French entry into the war also had a material impact on the Dutch Republic,
Hmm.
and they joined the war. And of course, Russia was like, we are neutral.
Russia seems very remote to be even involved. You know what I mean? That's just
Well, I do believe that American diplomats did go to Russia to get support.
yeah. I guess they were trying to get support from as many people as they could. That makes sense.
Everybody and anybody. The British government of Lord North came under criticism when the news of the surrender reached London. It is said of Lord Germain that, quote, the secretary is incapable of conducting a war.
Oh, it's so British.
And Horace Walpole was quoted, even though he was wrong,
No.
quote, we are very near the end of the American War. Lord North issued a proposal for peace terms in Parliament that did not include independence. And of course, since it did not include independence, Congress rejected.
Good move, Congress.
So, just a little bit more. The battlefields of this campaign, most of them have been preserved in some way, usually as a state or national park. But there are also historic sites under state or federal control. Some monuments erected to mark the battles are listed as National Historic Landmarks, and some of them are listed separately on the National Register of Historic Places. Many of these battles are regularly reenacted, and the Battle of Bennington is marked in the state of Vermont by Bennington Battle Day. You know, even though it was actually fought in New York,
Right.
present day New York. So the recognitions of Benedict Arnold's contributions to the American success are particularly noteworthy, and everything that they put up for him. Like the obelisk at Saratoga National Historical Park has on 3 of its 4 sides alcoves bearing statues of the 3 generals instrumental in the success of Saratoga, which Gates, Schuyler, and Morgan. The 4th, representing Arnold, is empty.
Hmm. I guess he did change
Traitor.
sides. Yeah.
Traitor.
Benedict Arnold.
The park also contains the Boot Monument, which, though again without identifying Arnold by name, does honor his contribution to the Second Saratoga Battle. So, there's that.
Yeah, I mean, that's something.
That's something. All right. So that is where we're going to leave that. So next time we are going to move on to Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Theater.
That's exciting.
All right. So at the end of our episodes, we like to honor one of our fallen angels. And today we are actually going to honor Major General Richard Montgomery. His hometown was Kingsbridge, New York. He served in the Continental Army, the Northern Army, and his date of sacrifice was October 31st, 1775. Killed in action in Quebec City, province of Quebec, British America. He was 37. And he died in the war we are currently talking about. Born to a wealthy family in the town of Swords near Dublin, Ireland on December 2nd, 1738, Richard Montgomery became a non-commissioned officer in the British Royal Army after dropping out of Dublin's Trinity College. As a young British soldier, Montgomery was sent to the American colonies as European powers, Britain, France, and Spain, along with allied native tribes, clashed over territorial expansion on the continent. The French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War, ended with the Treaty of Paris in early 1763, after decisive British victories in Louisbourg, Quebec, and Montreal. France was forced to give up all territories east of the Mississippi, except for the port city of New Orleans. The British gained the territories of Canada and the Ohio River Valley. The Spanish ceded Florida to the British. All French territorial possessions west of the Mississippi River were turned over to Spain. The French were permitted control of the sugar-producing island of Martinique, Guadeloupe, and St. Lucia in the Caribbean. Montgomery distinguished himself during the war, serving in the siege of Louisbourg and the 1759 Lake Champlain campaign. He was transferred to the Caribbean, where he oversaw the captures of Martinique Island and the city of Havana, Cuba. He was promoted to captain in May 1762. 2 years after the war, Montgomery was sent back to England. He became increasingly frustrated with his lack of promotion in the British Army and with the Crown's antagonism towards the American colonies. Montgomery resigned his commission and purchased a farm in New York Colony near Kingsbridge, about 13 miles north of New York City. There he met and married Janet Livingston, daughter of a wealthy New York judge. Due to high taxation and heavily handed control from a distant British governor, tensions grew quickly in the American colonies. Richard Montgomery joined in rallies against the Crown. While he preferred a quiet life on his farm, Montgomery's fellow New Yorkers viewed him as a man of integrity and elected him to represent Dutchess County in the New York Provisional Congress. Anger with the British Crown boiled over, and the 13 colonies pushed for independence, forming a Continental Congress on September 5th, 1774. On June 14th, 1775, the Continental Army was authorized under the command of George Washington, according to the Army Historical Society. Quote, much to his chagrin, Montgomery was appointed a brigadier general in the Continental Army on 22 June 1775. Despite his reluctance to leave his new wife and farm, Montgomery wrote, the will of an oppressed people must be respected. He was designated second in command of the American forces in New York, and on 26 June, he and his superior, M.G. Philip Schuyler, were given orders to invade Canada. At their headquarters at Fort Ticonderoga, he labeled his troops as the sweepings of society and the officers as vulgar. He shaped these misfits into an effective army as they advanced down Lake Champlain to lay siege to several Canadian towns. General Schuyler was forced to step down in mid-September of 1775, leaving Montgomery in command. Under Montgomery's leadership, his patriot troops captured Fort Chambly and Fort St. John. Then the city of Montreal on November 13, 1775. Montgomery's collection of some 300 ragtag soldiers then turned south to link up with General Benedict Arnold's 1,000 men, who were marching through the wilderness of Maine. The combined forces were moving to take Quebec from the British. Montgomery was now a major general, though he was unaware of the promotion. establishing siege lines around the city of Quebec. Montgomery and Arnold demanded surrender from the British officers within. Their terms were repeatedly offered and rejected. General Montgomery hoped to delay an attack until a snowfall could hide the movement of his troops. But General Arnold was concerned that a looming January 1st, 1776 enlistment expiration could drastically reduce the number of troops available. The attack was coordinated for the early hours of December 31st, 1775. The Americans' Battlefield Trust recounts those first moments of the Battle of Quebec. Quote, that morning, Montgomery led a group of his men towards the interior of Quebec. With sword drawn and lantern out, the Patriots advanced towards a blockhouse where the British and Canadian defenders noticed this movement and let loose a volley of grape shot and muskets, which killed Montgomery and the men close to him instantly. General Arnold was badly injured in the leg, and many of the attacking Continental Army troops were killed or taken prisoner. The remaining forces retreated from the city, confused and blinded by snow. Despite the failed attack, the New Year Eve's loss to the highly regarded General Richard Montgomery, the first death of an American general officer in the Revolution, would inspire his fellow patriots. Because of Montgomery's bravery and leadership in the face of adversity, the colonies had a new hero and martyr for the American cause. Buried honorably by the British enemy after the battle, General Richard Montgomery was reinterred at St. Paul's Cathedral in New York City in 1818, underneath a monument commissioned by Congress. So, Major General Richard Montgomery, thank you. All right, that's going to do it for us this week. We're going to wish y'all a fair winds and following seas. Bye.